an automotive YouTube channel where I give you the ins and outs of car knowledge. And in today's episode, I'm going to be teaching you how to properly and safely install some rear brakes on a Lexus and Toyota product. Now this job can be done on many different Lexus or Toyota vehicles, whether it's a Lexus ES 350, an LS, an IS, whether it's a Toyota Camry, a Toyota Corolla, or any kind of Lexus or Toyota vehicle. So we're going to get started and show you how to properly do this job. Let's get after it. For this Lexus brake job, you'll need a flathead screwdriver, a 14mm socket, and a 14mm wrench. You'll need a wire brush, a rubber mallet, a C-clamp, you'll need a thread locker, you'll need brake grease, you'll need some brake cleaner, you'll need some jack stands, a floor jack, and you'll need your wheel wrench to take off your wheel. And of course, the first thing we do is loosen up the wheels before we jack up the car. And we'll also do the other wheel as well. After we unloosen the lug nuts, now we'll look for the jack point at the back of the car and start jacking up the car. Here's a good split shot of what's happening in real time when I'm jacking up the car. So here I'm looking at the bottom of the car and looking for the jack points to properly put the jack stands underneath it.
That was super easy. Much easier than my car.
Now we'll lower the jack and rest the car on the jack stands. Alright, so now that we have our wheels off, we're going to take off the caliper, the bracket, and the rotor. So we're going to start off with the caliper. The caliper is attached with two 14mm bolts, one on the top and one on the bottom. So take a 14mm socket and just knock it off. So now that we have the two 14mm bolts from the caliper, we're going to just wiggle it out like this, right? And then we're going to set this down somewhere where it can rest properly. So you see this line right here? This line is your brake line, and it has your brake fluid, and it's a pretty fragile brake line. So I want to make sure that when we rest our caliper, we put it on the suspension components in the back. See right here, it's resting fine, and there's no tension on this brake line right here. So right here, we got our rotor in the middle, and we got our two brake pads on the outside. We got the outer, and we got the inner pads. So literally, we just can pop them right off. And we see right here, these pads are pretty worn. The outer, oh, here's the inner one. Pop out the outer. So these brake pads definitely need to be replaced. So after our brake caliper bolts are off, we're gonna take the bracket bolts off, and they're also attached by two 14mm bolts. We got another one down here as well. Okay, after much persuasion, sorry if the brake caliper's in the way, just want to make sure it's resting fine. You guys can see that. Taking off that bolt right there. Just get her off. Let me show you the front. Alright, so now that we got the caliper off, resting on the suspension components, we have the caliper bracket bolts off. And by the way, let's just keep our orientation the same. So the bracket bolts, the caliper bolts, you can just see that the bracket just comes right off. The next thing we'll need to do is take off this little rubber housing right here. Take a flat screwdriver, pop it right off. Alright, so now we're going to take off the rotor, but in most cases you can just pull it right off, but for Lexus, they kind of have this little locking mechanism. So if you look inside, there's a little star wheel, and that star wheel puts tension on the emergency brake. So we need to use a flathead screwdriver and push on the star wheel, either on the top or bottom, to unloosen those shims on the inside so we can loosen up the rotor to pull it out. And the orientation will be on the bottom. So if it's up like this, just bring that through hole and look through, and you can see right there. It looks like a little star. All right. Got a little pizza break, a little vlog. Good pizza from Terra. So, guys, excuse me. So we got the rotor off, right? And it was a real pain, I'm not gonna lie to you. I'll show you the rotor right here. So they have these little through bolts. It's an 8 by 1.25, and you just have to kind of, drill them in there to really push this off because it's on there bad. So just an FYI for these Lexus and Toyota cars that their rotors are rusted on badly. But now that we have this off, we can kind of see a little bit more. There's that little star wheel I was talking about earlier. So, you gotta click on it with a flat screwdriver, and when you push in, it'll either loosen or tighten these shims right here. And these are the emergency brake, and they look really good. Nothing really wrong with them. They're a little rusty and dusty, but that's totally fine with this mileage, this wear and tear of this vehicle. The springs look really good, actually. The hub looks fine. Everything looks great. We're just gonna spray it down with some brake cleaner just to clean it all up. Next, I'm spraying down the rotor with some brake cleaner because when they store them, they put grease on them so they don't rust. So just clean it off with some brake cleaner. After the rotor is cleaned off, we can put it on the wheel hub. We'll need to use the flathead screwdriver to click on that star wheel in the opposite direction so that we can have those shims lightly drag on the inside of the rotor. We're going to hear a little drag. We're going to listen for some resistance, so keep your ears open. And we are good to go. Next, we're going to take the old brakes and the new brakes and just compare them with the orientation. So we see right here with the old brakes, they look really old. Comparing it with the new ones, you can see the brake life has reduced substantially. The new one has so much life left, looks really good. So we're just putting them side by side. You can see the difference. So we'll see the shims, and these have these clips that we have to put on the new ones. So they come with new clips, so we'll keep the orientation the same, and they just pop right in really easily, just to make sure they're in there properly. Very simple. And we'll do the same, keep the orientation the same, take a clip and pop it right in. So next we're going to take the bracket and take off the old little hardware pieces. So they're just some metal pieces, they clip on, so they'll be a little bit annoying to take off, but you just pop them right off just like that, and take the other side as well. Make sure you keep the same orientation. They're all the same, but just keep, consistency is key here. So it'll be a little hassle, as you can see right there, but it'll come off with some elbow grease. So after getting the old hardware off, we're going to use a wire brush and clean off the surface just to get a new fresh surface for the new hardware. After we clean it, we'll just clean it off with some brake cleaner. And now that the surface is all cleaned up, we're going to put on the new hardware. So we'll just follow the same orientation, and we'll just clip them right into place. And they just pop right in with a little bit of persuasion. Alright, so now that we have our little hardware pieces on the brake pads and on the bracket right here, we're going to use some brake lubricant. So this stuff helps stop squeaking, helps dissipate heat, and it also helps keep everything lubricated nice and smoothly. Always want to use brake grease when you're putting on new brakes and rotors. Just get a little bit on and just get every piece of metal. So you got the shim on the back of the pad. Just make sure we're getting everything. The little metal brackets we installed right here. Don't put any on the pad itself. Try to get the grease away from the pad. And get every metal contact point on the bracket too. Once we finished greasing up all of our different contact parts, We're gonna look at these little rubber shims right here. And actually, we're gonna pull this out. Pull out this little, what's this called? This is the bracket bolt. So this is how the bracket gets attached to the rotor, but it's also a little through hole and it's greased up. So we're just gonna clean it up and put some new grease on it. Every time you're doing brakes, just make sure you put some new grease on these little components right here. And then just put them back in. Just like that. So we placed the caliper bracket on, and we have the bolts for the caliper bracket. Now, it's gonna be important to tighten these bolts up properly, so we're using some thread locker. So this is called thread locker blue, medium strength. All you gotta do is put a little bit of thread locker on, and just like that, on both bolts. Oops. So now we're just putting the bracket bolts back on, aligning it properly.
And I tighten the bolts to 30 foot-pounds or just really tight so they don't move.
So now we're gonna look at our caliper. And here's our piston. This piston will compress onto the brake pads. So just inspect the boot, make sure it looks good. It's never gonna be bad really. It's not a wear and tear item, but since we're here, we're just gonna inspect it and we're gonna clean it with some brake grease. So as you can see, we got a C-clamp onto the caliper and the old brake pad. So this piston, we gotta compress it back in. So in order to do that, just put the old brake pad on, take the C-clamp, and just clamp it back in. Once we compress in that piston, we're now going to put on the brakes onto the bracket. So you got to take these little edge pieces and you got to pull them out a little bit because it's a little tricky. The clearance is kind of small here. But yeah, just wiggle it in with the flat screwdriver and it'll just pop right in, and make sure you pop them back into place. Keep everything nice and tight. So we got the outer brake pad, and then now we'll do the inner brake pad. So we installed the brake pads. Now we're going to take our caliper, slide it right over. And these little pins in the back, you can push them in. See that? Even once you push them in, the caliper comes up. Again, some more Loctite on the bolts. And you bolt them back in. Bolting on the caliper, you might have some sliding with that little pin. So get a 14 wrench and a 14 socket just to hold it, just to tighten it down. So I did that on the top, and now I'm also doing the same thing at the bottom. I like to hold it and it's not sliding and moving. Rotors on a Lexus or Toyota vehicle. Now, if you can see on the screen right now, this is an actual quote from Lexus themselves. They quoted a $461 brake job just for the rears of this vehicle. And we were able to buy all of our parts for $150, which means we saved $310. That is a huge amount of savings. This job was really easy, really simple, and yes, you can do it. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I hope you smash that subscribe button. And in the comments below, tell me what kind of car you have and what kind of videos you want to see me do next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.